Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming today. We are going to be talking about leading change, preparing for both seismic and subtle organizational shifts. My name is Linda Wastyn. I am president and founder of Wastyn and Associates, which is a consulting company out of Davenport, Iowa. So my apologies for the temperature in here. I'm hoping there will be so much brain power going on that we will warm ourselves up, or it's just to make sure that post-lunch food coma does not take effect. But if you need to stand up, you need to stretch, you need to do something to warm yourself up, please do. So let me start by just talking a little bit about who I am, where I come from, kind of my perspective that I'm going to be using in this presentation, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today. So, as I said, my name is Linda Wastyn. I am the president and founder of Wastyn and Associates. We come from Davenport, Iowa. You see my bio up there. But what's not up there is that my education comes out of politics, communication, rhetoric, and then organizational development, or where my degrees fall. So that's really the perspective that I take. A lot of change is communication-based. A lot of it is organization. A lot of it is politics, and not the stuff that's happening down the road, but politics in terms of how do we work with people to get things done, how do we influence people, how do we use our power bases effectively. So when I'm talking about leading change, those are kind of the lenses through which we're going to talk about this. Okay, make sense? So really, three things we're going to talk about today. First of all, is your organization ready for change? Hopefully, if you went through the pandemic, you understand change, your organization got ready for change, but it amazes me how some, what I'm going to call seemingly simple things that you think an organization would need to do to make sure that they can effectively navigate change, they don't. And so we're going to talk about what does it mean to be ready for change and what are some of the things you can do to help make your organization ready for change. Then we're going to talk about how do you engage your stakeholders in organizational change. What can you do regardless of where you sit on the hierarchy? Because I believe that anybody can influence change. I don't see leadership as something that's a title. It's something that is an action, and so anybody can be a leader regardless of where you sit in the organizational hierarchy, and we're going to talk about that as well. And I am also a firm believer that effective change happens with people, not to people. And so we're going to talk more about that in a minute. But if you are just sitting in your office going, let's do this from now on, it is much less likely to be an effective change for a number of reasons, and it's much less likely to stick. Then we'll end by talking about how do you sustain that change, and how do you manage it in the long run. And we'll end with a case study of a change that we're working on in our community that's just getting started, and want to introduce you to that concept as well. Okay? Are we ready? All right. So let's start by talking about readiness for your organization to change. I think COVID caught a lot of organizations pretty flat-footed. We do this is how we do it, this is how we've always done it. And all of a sudden, seemingly overnight, the world changed. We're going through that again. Although it's not overnight, it's more a long, steady drip of things that are changing. So hopefully some of the lessons your organization, the people in charge of your organization learned in COVID are able to translate now, but they may or may not. You may not have done a good job in changing during COVID. You may be at a different organization or in a different position. And so we'll talk about what is it that your organization needs to be ready to change. How many of you are experiencing change in your either personal, professional? Holy cow. Anybody not? Yeah. Either that was self-selection bias, you came because of that, or I do think that things are changing so rapidly, especially in the nonprofit world, especially for grant professionals, that our world has been turned upside down. So what are some of the things that your organization needs in order to be ready to effectively manage that change? First thing you need to make sure is that there is a commitment to your mission and to your purpose. And that's not just the person at the top, that's throughout your entire organization. Do all your employees, do all of your stakeholders have a commitment to the mission and the purpose why you exist? If they are there to collect a paycheck, they may or may not be as willing to change as if they are saying, yes, I'm here to fix this problem in the community. And don't assume that just because they show up for work, they do a good job, that they are committed to your mission, that they are committed to your purpose. Don't assume they know your mission or they know your purpose. I think that's one of the things that a lot of organizations do wrong. They take it for granted. Well, in orientation, we told them what we do. We shared our mission statement. Look, it's on the wall. And they assume that that means everybody knows it, understands it, and lives it. So my recommendation is that you have intentional conversations with your staff, your stakeholders, anybody who needs to be involved in change regularly, to say, not just, can you recite the mission statement? I don't care that they can recite the mission statement. What I care about is, do they know what it means? And when push comes to shove, are they going to go to mission, right? Because that's what you want to make sure that they're doing. I don't know that this side will be any better. So, taking time at a staff meeting, if you have an all-staff retreat, just to say, tell me what our mission means to you. We facilitate strategic planning sessions, and I always start a strategic planning session with, let's review your mission statement. And I'll have clients who say, oh, we don't want to rewrite our mission. And I tell them that's not my purpose. My purpose is I want to make sure everyone's thinking about mission. And I want to have a conversation so that, what Ralph thinks about our mission and thinks that it is the same thing that Amy does and the same thing that Emily does, right? Because we all come at this from different angles. So make sure, if nothing else, you want to make sure everyone is committed to your mission and committed to your purpose. And some of that you can also see through behaviors. You might need to coach some people. Are you just here for a paycheck, or do you really want to do the work that we are doing? And sometimes you have to bless and release, unfortunately. Second thing you need to have is access to information. I am a firm believer in data. I am a data nerd to my core. We can't make change, we can't make effective change without the information about what's going on out there, if that's impacting us, and about what's going on within our organizations. Unfortunately, there are some people who have the belief that knowledge is power. So I'm going to hoard information. I worked with someone who was like that. She would hoard information like crazy because that gave her the power, or she perceived she had the power. Some people in positions of authority will do that. If you're working in an organization where information is not freely shared, it will make change much harder, because people will go, what do you mean XYZ is happening? What do you mean we've got, demand is going up for our services, or our money's going down, or all those other kinds of things. So make sure you share information freely. Now, if you're a person at the top of an organization or in a management role, you can't share everything, right? But make sure that you are sharing everything that you can. And if there's a directive coming from above that you are going to have to implement, do your best to make sure that you are sharing that as soon as you can with the people that you supervise, because you need to have that information.
And Maggie in the chat says, analyzing and understanding your own data, what stories is it telling?
Yes, amen. Looking internally too. Are you collecting data? Are you looking at the data? Are you just looking and going, yay? Or are you looking for those kernels that are starting to say, problem, problem, right? Those little yellow flags become really important as well. The other thing, next thing you need is transparency. So access to information, but also similarly the willingness to share that more broadly, the willingness to the extent that you can open your books to people as well. Last year in our office, I have a team that's now of 8 people, and about this time, no, it was in December, we lost 2 staff in 2 days, and day 3 we found out our health insurance was going up by 65%. Yeah, we went, holy cow. Oh yeah, and this was December 12th. We had to, if we were going on the exchange, we had to do it by the 15th, or we would not have health insurance for the month of January. It was a really, really fun week. And so what we did was, at each time a staff person left, we brought everybody together and said, so-and-so's leaving, so-and-so's leaving. By the 3rd day that when we said, we need everybody to get together, we gotta talk about your health insurance. And they said, no more meetings, please, no more meetings. But what we did in that, we not only provided information to them, here's what's happening, here's what, you know, as a company, we provide a certain percentage of your health insurance. Here's what we can provide. Here's what you're going to have to pay. We can go on the exchange, and here's what we can do. We had done our research and, you know, brought that information together, and we made the decision as a staff. Now, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to do that again in the next couple weeks. But what I learned from that, you know, first of all, not everybody loved the decision, me included, but they recognized it was what was best for the company as a whole, and they better understood the whole process of health insurance. Some of them didn't know that as a company, we pay more than half of their health insurance. And that, I just assumed that was common knowledge, right? And so that also helped gather the buy-in. So make sure you've got some transparency as well. You need open, honest communication. I think this is the hardest part. You need to be able to tell people when things aren't going well, including when that thing not going well is them. Sometimes, depending on what the change is, it might impact what they're doing, right? It might impact their department, but you need to make sure you are having that kind of open, honest communication, and you need to create that kind of a culture where that open, honest communication is possible. That's also, if you're the person in a position of authority, that open, honest communication needs to go up. In fact, I would argue that's more important. It absolutely has to go up. Because if the people on the front lines are afraid to tell you this isn't working, or here's what I'm hearing, then change isn't going to happen, or it's not going to be very effective. You also need a willingness to learn. If you're an organization or an individual who's like, oh, we've always done it that way, you're not going to be very effective. AI is one of the things that is totally changing the grant profession. And we could have debates from here until Sunday about is that good, is that bad? But the reality is it's here. And so if you're not willing to at least learn and experiment and make your decisions in an informed way based upon data, not based upon what's, what you think it's going to be, then you're not going to change very effectively. Relatedly, you have to be willing to fail. And that's not just as an organization, that is also, or not just as an individual, that's also as an organization. So if you are in an organization where you get punished for trying something new and it not working, are you going to try something new? You're going to stick with tried and true. But if you are truly in an organization that rewards innovation, even when innovation doesn't work, and that's where the open, honest communication comes in, right? So if I'm going, I want to try this, and I get permission to try this, and I realize halfway through, this isn't working, if there's not that permission to fail, I'm not going to go to my supervisor and say, that didn't work. I'm going to hide it, and it's going to keep not working, and it's going to just snowball. Okay? So these are the requisites that you need to have as an organization to be well positioned for change in your organization. If you don't have them, you want to start thinking about how can you get them in your organization. Okay? Now, how many of you are in a position of authority at your organization? Okay. So you can kind of directly affect change. You're a manager who can start to do these things. I would look at these and say, what are you doing to create this kind of culture? What are you doing that might be impeding this kind of culture? And what are some of the things that you can do, or what kind of change can you effectuate? If you're not in that position of authority, then it's having that conversation with the person who is, especially in these changing times. The other thing I look at is we all can have influence over the spheres in which we have influence, right? So even if you're not a manager, you are possibly in charge of how does the grants function, and you can, even if you're an office of one, that makes consensus much easier, start to put this kind of a culture in place as well. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
For the information, because information in itself can be interpreted sometimes, and it has to be translated.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. What she said is in the transparency, we also need to make sure we're sharing context. And part of that's open, honest communication, right? Because we're all coming at everything from a different perspective. And so even if we've been working together for years, your perception might be different than mine. I need to be free to say, okay, tell me more. You need to be free to tell me more, and that context, even if it's not good news. And I think that's even harder and more important, is sharing the scary, right? And which is often where change comes from. So in your packet, there is a readiness pulse checklist that asks you to kind of go through and say, okay, rate your own organization. And we won't do it now, but this is something you can take back to your organization and start to say, where are we? Are we ready to learn? Are we ready to change? And where you score yourselves lower, then start to create an action plan that can help you then create that kind of environment that will help you change, okay? So we now know that we are ready to change, and in this environment, you need to do that like by Monday, because I'm sure there will be more changes coming next week. And so it's ever evolving. Are you going to be perfect? No, because we're human, we're not perfect. But trying to build toward that environment is important. And if you're not, and a change comes, SNAP benefits are going to end on Saturday, and people are finding out what their ACA rates are on Saturday, so I think things are really going to change next week. And so even if you aren't ready, you're going to have to change, right? We can't go time out, wait, I'm not ready for it. So the change process, and regardless of change, they tend to go through or should go through similar steps. So the first step is you have to identify what the problem is. And I'm thinking organizational problems. And this sounds really simple. We know what the problem is. What I find when change fails, often it's because we haven't identified the true problem. Because we don't tend to think through the depth of the problems that we're facing as an organization. We look very superficially. And when we try to solve that superficial level problem, then we're really not solving the actual problem that exists. Or we have a solution in search of a problem. I was working with a board one time that wanted to do a merger. And there were people on the board gung-ho about this merger. There were others who were kind of like going, okay, let's think about it. I was kind of on the, okay, I don't think so, but I have an open mind, let me think about it. And as we went through the conversations, the people who were really gung-ho for the merger kept talking about all the benefits. It'll do this, it'll do that, it'll do this and that, which all sounded really great. And I kept saying, what problem are we trying to solve? Okay, those might be great, but what's not great now? And we ended up not merging. Never know whether that was the right decision, but both organizations are thriving, so I would think it was. But oftentimes, we'll get a solution, but we don't know what the problem is. So I still to this day don't know what problem they were trying to solve, but had we merged, that problem might still be there, okay? So make sure you do a really good job identifying the problem. We're gonna talk a little bit more about problem identification in just a minute. The next thing you do is brainstorm solutions. So once we've identified what the true problem is, let's think through what the solutions could be. And brainstorming means we are not evaluating. This means there is no dumb idea. Because oftentimes the really good idea comes out of a dumb idea, right? People go, oh my gosh. And depending on what the problem is, sometimes you really have to think outside of the box, which is why you need to be in an environment, in a culture that allows you to fail, that allows you to think outside of the box, okay? And the example I'm gonna give you, talk about what we're doing in our community, I think this is one of the things, this is where we're stuck. And this is where we need to start moving some people, is to start brainstorming some creative solutions. When you're doing that, you need to make sure you are engaging your stakeholders. This should not be done with the person in a position of authority sitting in their office, their ivory tower in the corner of the office building, going, what should we do? As I said earlier, I firmly believe change happens with people, not to people. And so I could be the most brilliant person in the world and I could have the answer, but if I don't have buy-in from everybody else who has to implement it, they might implement it because I'm the boss and I said to, but how much is their heart gonna be in it, right? And how hard are they gonna work for it? If it's their idea, even if it's the same as my idea, and they came up with it, how hard are they gonna work to implement it? Is their heart gonna be in it? Okay, so that's one reason why you want to do that. Second of all, generally, depending on the size of your organization, your staff are closer to the problem than you are. So they're the ones who are working with the clients. They're the ones who are dealing with the issues day in and day out. As you go up the management food chain, you get more and more distant from the work of the organization. And so talking to the people who are doing the mission work and hearing their perspectives is a great way to have good solutions. How many of you read the book, Jim Collins' Good to Great? It's getting dated, but it is phenomenal. And he talks about how you need to get the frontline workers involved. And he has an example, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. It's a car manufacturing company. And they come up with a new way to put cars together. And the assembly line workers are going, can't do it. It's not going to work. But because management, you know, we're the managers, we know everything, thought that that's what should happen, they implemented the change and it failed.
Can you repeat the book title and author for the chat?
Certainly. It's Jim Collins, and the title of the book is Good to Great. It's probably 25 years old at this point. He's got a companion piece, which is Good to Great in the nonprofit sector, which is teeny tiny, maybe 30 pages, because all of his examples in Good to Great are from the for-profit sector. And what he did was he studied companies who exceeded the benchmarks for their industry, and then said, okay, what did they do different than everybody else? And as I recall, he had 5 different principles. And one of them was engaging your frontline. And then the one for philanthropy, because one of his talks about, it's about revenue generation. And so philanthropy talks about how you get engaged in your mission. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you put that on your reading list. But don't just say, okay, we've come up with solutions, me boss, I'm going to figure out what's the best way to get this done. Give it to the staff who are closest to the work and whose buy-in you need to make this happen. And it's sanity. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Times of change are times of high stress, very high stress. And the rumor mill is going to be running rampant. And you want to make sure that you are dispelling any of that, that you are telling people things. In normal times, people need to hear a message 7 times for it to resonate. And so in high stress times, they need to hear it more. So if you say something once, it's not going to hit. If you say something twice, it's not going to hit. So make sure you communicate, communicate, communicate. And that doesn't mean, again, if you're the person leading this change, I'm going to have a staff meeting, I'm going to stand here, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, now go out and do it. Have room for 2-way communication. Let's have some dialogues. Let's have some conversation. Ask your questions. Tell me your perceptions, right? All of those kinds of things. So that so that you truly understand this change. I understand where you're coming from. And maybe based on that conversation, we change direction a little bit, right? Because of some perception. So you've got to communicate, communicate, communicate. And then for some organizations, there's a formal approval process for getting change done. You would need to go through whatever that formal approval process is, okay? So there's 2 different types of problems, and which is one of the reasons why identifying your problem is so important. And once you identify it, you need to then identify what type of problem are we dealing with. Not only do we need to identify the problem, but the other thing when I see change fail, it's because they put the wrong kind of solution on the wrong kind of problem. We identified the problem correctly, but we didn't put a good solution in place. And so first type of problem is called a technical problem. And technical problems are, air quotes, easy to solve. They're things where there is a known solution. It's something that management or authority can put into place. You just need to pull the trigger. The example I think of is from the development world, our database stinks, okay? We have a database we're looking to replace, right? And so we need a new database that will do A, B, C, and D. So what do we need to do to solve that problem? Research, find a database, and buy it, right? Not quite as simple as that, but simple, right? It doesn't require, I was going to say an act of Congress. It doesn't require, a whole bunch of people outside our organization to get together and try and make that change happen. The other type of problem is called an adaptive problem. And adaptive problems are those for which there are no known solutions. I think a lot of the environment we are heading into, we are in, is a lot of adaptive problems. COVID was an adaptive problem. How are we going to navigate this? We hadn't done that before, and so we had to figure things out as we were going along. There are also problems that require other stakeholders. So it's not something that even us as an organization can solve. It's not something that certain groups within our organization can solve. We need to get other people on board, which also means we can't solve them through authority. We need to use influence, and we need to use persuasion, we need to use communication. These tend to be recurrent problems. When I think about adaptive problems, one that comes to my mind is hunger. We work with our local food bank, right? Their goal, their mission, their vision is to end hunger in eastern Iowa and western Illinois. A, I'm skeptical it'll happen. But B, it's also one of those where they truly mean it. They don't want to, as they say, just feed people. They want to understand the root causes of hunger and work to get rid of those. Can they do that alone? No. They don't have the expertise. And could they build a team that has all that expertise? Yes, but they'd be foolish because all that expertise is in the community. Is it an easy answer? Absolutely not. If it was, we would have done it, right? And a lot of the societal issues that we face today are these kinds of adaptive problems. And we can't just solve them ourselves, we have to go beyond. And what that means is we have to change. We can't do business as usual. And a lot of the changes that are going on in federal funding are going to be forcing a lot of these adaptive solutions. If you are heavily dependent on federal funds, then you can just wait for things to get better, or you can go, okay, what do I do now? How can I change our funding formula, what we do, how we do it, et cetera? And again, not something easily done, not something you're going to necessarily do alone. You might need to get state policymakers involved, local, county, all those folks together, and some of your other nonprofits in your area together as well. Often these are emotional, right? New database, okay, for some that's an emotional question. But generally when you're talking about something that's, more operational, right? Getting new health insurance. Okay, that was emotional for people too. But again, that was something where we ran the numbers, we talked to folks, we looked at their numbers, we made a decision, we moved on, right? And we were able to do that. But adaptive problems are not. If you want to read more about the difference between adaptive and technical problems, and there's a bibliography at the end of the slides, this is Ron Heifetz and his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers. Has anybody read that? Oh, one of my favorite books of all times. Heifetz, H-E-I-F-I-T-Z. It's in the last side, Leadership Without Easy Answers. And what he says is, when we see change fail, often it's because we have an adaptive problem and we apply a technical solution to it. Excuse me, and that's just not going to work because the problem is still there. So what do you do? How do you identify your adaptive questions or identify what type of problem you have? When you have an adaptive problem, there is a gap between your aspiration and your reality. I want hunger to go away in my community. It's still here. It's growing. I wonder what's causing hunger, right? And so you start to ask those kinds of questions. And there's also not an easy answer to what causes hunger. The answer's this long, right? And interdependent. And so there's a lot of different answers that it can be. The next thing you want to look at is you want to make sure that you are getting the perspective of other stakeholders. Because if you're, and I'm again looking at the perspective of the food bank, they're looking at this from the food bank perspective. And I will say our food bank is awesome at taking these other perspectives. But maybe we want to look at it from a housing perspective, or from a mental health perspective, or from an employment perspective. Bringing those experts to the table to have that conversation will also then help broaden out the scope, both of how you're defining the problem and the types of solutions that you're going to have. It also, solving an adaptive problem like that, you aren't going to solve it alone. You're going to need all of those stakeholders. Remember, change doesn't happen to people, it happens with people. The sooner you get them engaged in the conversation, and they're going, ooh, yeah, we could do that. Ooh, that's gonna change this, and this in our organization. But if they're bought into the mission, the purpose, going back, right? And they go, yeah, I believe we should solve the hunger problem in our community. Okay, that means we're gonna have to do something different. Then they're much more likely to do so. And if I had the answer to give you an example, we'd have solved hunger in the community. The other thing you have to look at is whatever the solution is you come up with might hurt other people. And so often these types of adaptive problems, not only do they not have an easy solution, but the solution might solve problem A and make problem B worse. And so you have to start gathering the data, being transparent, having open, honest communication, being willing to try something and fail, and continuing that conversation. Okay, we solved hunger, but you know, now the housing crisis is worse. I have no idea how that would happen. I am totally making that up. And so now you've got a new problem. And some of it, when we're talking about a lot of these human service types of problems, it's how do we, what's worse? And maybe it's we'll tackle A first, and then we'll tackle B, and then we'll tackle C, but now you've got a coalition together who's doing this together. And you've got these problems in your organization. They're just harder to identify because everybody's got something different going on in their organization. And the human service problems are a little easier to understand. You also need to keep your eye on the ball of what are the benefits if you can make progress. So what's your goal? If we truly could solve hunger in our community, and imagine if that were the case, just think about how much money and time is invested in feeding people and what's lost when people are hungry. I think that's an amazing kind of goal. And if you help the whole group keep their eye on the prize, that can help them with those kinds of adaptive problems as well, okay? In your organization, you might need to totally change how you're doing something. You might need to make a decision that we're going to end this particular service line, or we're going to consolidate this, or we're going to add to this. All of these can be adaptive solutions that still go through this kind of process. Make sense? Okay. Yep. So if you need to initiate change in your organization, some of the things that you want to do to start the process. First thing you need to do, create a safe space. It needs to be You can say what you want in here. People aren't going to attack. We're going to, and sometimes, especially early on, it might get pretty emotionally charged. And you might need to say, I know this meeting is scheduled for an hour, but it feels like people are getting worked up. We're done in a half an hour. Go back to your desks, let's do A, B, C, D, let's pull this data. But you've got to make sure you have a safe place for people to share their thoughts, their emotions. Depending on the change you're talking about, people could get angry, they could get scared. So make sure you're creating that space. Again, if you already have the culture with information, transparency, open, honest communication, this is a lot easier. If you don't, then this is how you can start building that culture, is to build that safe space. If you are the person who is in a position of authority, you are the one who's defining whether or not that space is safe. So how are you reacting? If somebody's challenging your idea, are you immediately getting defensive? Oh, no, that's not the case, right? What the message I'm sending then is, I'm telling you to be open and honest, but in reality, I don't want you to say anything that's critical of, me or my thoughts. Or if someone else is attacking someone or not creating that safe space, are you calling them out on it, right? Tina, I appreciate what you have to say, but, I need you to tone it down, or please let so-and-so finish, or whatever kind of thing to help create that safe space, okay? Those of you in front where I can read your name tags, which is only about here, so the rest of you are safe. You also then, as you're initiating space, you want to regulate the temperature. Depending on where you are in change, depending on how big the change is, depending on if people are seeing it coming, it might get very emotional very fast. So you need to be the one who's managing that and helping people. I don't want to say stay calm, because you never want to dismiss someone's emotions, right? If someone's getting angry or other kind of strong emotional response, give them an opportunity to explain if they're comfortable doing so. Give them a chance to cool down. But that doesn't mean you go, okay, Amy's upset, so we can't do this, right? We still need to have this conversation. Maybe we have a private conversation to better understand, or give you an opportunity to think about it, and so, and to articulate it. But you've got to make sure you're regulating the temperature. You also want to maintain disciplined action. In other words, if this is a change that needs to happen, you need to keep moving forward. It can't be, people are upset, this is hard, so we're just not gonna do it, right? Changing our health insurance, that was a bad week, let me tell you that. And so it was hard. We had a deadline, we had a hard, fast deadline, which made it harder, but made it easier. We couldn't drag out the decision, right? And we were telling our staff, go on the marketplace, this was like Wednesday night, go see if you can, what you can find. Do you have a health insurance option? Here's what it's gonna cost if we stay with the company we've been doing. And so, and we gave them the data, we gave them the deadline, and we kept moving, and we all had insurance by Saturday. So you've gotta, hopefully you never have to move that fast, but you gotta keep it moving. And maybe you're scheduling meetings every other week. When we were talking about the merger, we were scheduling regular meetings so we could continue that conversation. It dragged on, in my opinion, longer than it needed to, but we were at least always moving forward and always ending one meeting with what's our next step and what are we going to do next, so that we could keep going forward. And then, again, you want to give the work back to the people, right? We did the work we needed to do on our end as it related to insurance, but we said, okay, you go look and see what you need on your end. And we found a broker who would help them too. Here's the name, call him, make an appointment, look and come back on Friday at noon, and we'll see whether or not this is a solution that works for everybody. Wasn't ideal for everybody. I don't know what we would have done if somebody was totally left out in the cold, but poor choice of words in here. But we gave them an opportunity to do the work. We didn't take all the work. I would never want to pick insurance for somebody, right? But we at least had the basic data. And then you've got to evaluate your solutions. Once you make a decision, you're not done, right? When we're talking about change, that's just the start. So make sure you have a formal way to say, okay, our goal was X. And did this solution meet that goal? If not, you need to go back to the drawing board, right? We had health insurance for a year, right? Was it ideal? No. Might be what we have to do again this year. But we're evaluating that. We've been evaluating it all year. We asked staff mid-year, think about this. Did this work? And there was mixed. And so, we're looking at other options for this year. But again, you've got to keep evaluating it. So change from the middle. About half of you said that you are a person in a position of authority, which means the other half of you are changing from the middle, which means that you might have to change your boss. You may have influence over others. And last year, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, I did a whole presentation on how to lead up and how to lead your boss as well. And I've got those handouts. If you're interested, let me know, and I'm happy to send them to you. But just looking at this from a short way, basically what you're doing is you're using your bases of power. And everybody has 5 bases of power. One of them is authority, and that's what the manager has, but everybody has the others as well. And so the first thing you want to do, if you have to lead from the middle, is to collect data. Build your knowledge. And in many organizations, even the higher education institutions I worked for, there was one grant writer. It was me. So if there was something about grants that needed to be answered, they came to me. If there was a problem with grants, I needed to go to them. So make sure you stay an expert in your area. It's getting more challenging because it's like drinking from a fire hose. But there are a lot of resources out there that can help you navigate, help you learn what's going on, and you need to pick and choose what they are. So make sure you are staying up to date in your field. Kudos to all of you just by being here. You are doing that already. But you don't want to just remain current. You have to communicate. So you don't just want to be sitting in your office knowing all this crap's coming down and looking at, ooh, that's going to hurt us. Ooh, that's going to hurt us, and not telling anybody. You have to share it. And so you need to build your social networks. You need to build your credibility. You need to build your ability to go to your boss, knock on the door, and go, did you see this executive order that just came down? Here's, in my analysis, what I think, how I think this might impact us as an organization. Here's where I don't know, because I'm not an attorney, I'm not, I don't have all, but what I think we need to do is get these 5 people in a room and let's look at this, because this could be huge for us, right? That's leading from the middle. So build your skills to communicate that effectively within your organization. That's your persuasive power. Build trust. Hopefully you have trust across your organization, not just with your boss and your colleagues, but across the whole institution. I spent, more years than I want to admit, in higher education. And when you're a grant person, first of all, you don't work on an island. You work with people across the organization. And so you probably work with the finance office, but more than just kind of going, hello, I need a budget, right? Or hello, I need this. Build a relationship. Build trust with those people. so that when they see you coming going, have you seen this executive order? This could be ugly. Can we talk about the implications of it? They'll listen to you, they'll take the meeting, and you can have a productive conversation.
The screen went up.
Oh,
And also 10 minutes.
okay, thank you. Thank you. Eyes on the back of my head aren't working. And a lot of this is social capital. You want to make sure you are creating and using your social capital. Social capital is the relationships that you have with people. It is built by spending time with them. It is built by working with them. So it's not just I see Susie at the water cooler every day and I say hi. That's a great first step. But let's sit down, let me get to know you. Tell me a little bit about your family. What do you do? What are some of the pain points in your job? And how might I be able to help you with those? Here's the pain points in my job. Here's maybe how you can help me with that. And it's that give and take, that relationship. And social capital is built on trust. It's built on communication. It's all of the above, okay? I worked at a higher education institution, and I was in the advancement office. I was writing grants. And we had a, let's say we butted heads with the finance office, and particularly someone in the finance office, especially the person who processed gifts. And I was tasked with overseeing gift processing, and I, was told, oh, she's terrible, she won't respond, she won't do this, won't do that. So I picked up the phone and I said, let's talk. Where's your pain points in how we process gifts? Well, and she told me, I said, well, we can't do that. We could change this. How do we? And we developed a really good relationship. And it got to where she was also the one who submitted grant reports. And so she called me and say, okay, what's this grant need? I need this report. No, shoot, it's late. I have to have it by 5 o'clock today. And I'd get it to her and I'd go, crap, I forgot to do a budget. I need it by, in the next hour, and she'd get it. It's building that trust, building that relationship. And again, it all starts with communication because you're building trust, okay? So that's how we start change. That's how whether we're at the top, whether we're in the middle. As I was pulling this presentation together, I thought a really good example I can share both of an adaptive problem and kind of leading from the middle, but it's kind of leading from outside, as I thought about it, is an initiative that we're doing in our community called One Table Quad Cities. And what this is, it's a collaboration of nonprofits. It's led by my company, Wastyn and Associates, in partnership with our local AFP chapter. And we came together in about June, and we said, lots of change happening in the community, not the word I was going to use, and it's hurting our nonprofits. We have been doing a survey. We surveyed our nonprofits in February and then again in June, and just said, what kind of impact are you seeing from the changes in federal funding? We had done the same thing during COVID. We did it 3 or 4 surveys, and then things seemed to normalize, and we didn't do it again. We're like, it's time to find out again. And we found out they're hurting, they're stressed, they need information, they need an outlet, they need a way to communicate with people. And so I was kind of waiting for the leaders in our community to step forward and to do something with it, because we publish all this information. It's all on our website if you want to look at it. And nobody stepped forward. So in June, I sat down with the head of AFP. We had just kind of talked and said, we need to do something. And we came up with what has evolved into One Table Quad Cities. So federal funding cuts have hurt our nonprofits. Locally, 80% have already seen, 90%, have already seen or anticipate seeing either significant or minor changes in their funding. That's outrageous. A third are going to cut programming, 10% might close. I mean, this is devastating for a community. We have the data, right? That was the first thing. Let's get the information. And so with that, and when we asked them, what do you need? They said, we want information. We want an easy place where we can find out what's going on with the federal government. So that's on our website now. We need to understand how we can diversify our funding sources. We're working on that. We want a safe place where we can talk. All those kinds of things. So what we did, well, no voices stepped up. What we did was in June, at the end of June, we created what we called a nonprofit legislative roundtable. And it wasn't really a roundtable. We had invited 4 of our larger nonprofits to speak, and we had 100 nonprofits there. We had 10 legislators, federal, state, local. We had all of our media there. And we had those 4 very carefully. We were like, this is nonpartisan. We are not bashing. By the way, June 30, if you remember our timeline, was like 3 days before the big, beautiful bill passed. So we were sitting there going, please don't pass, not in the next hour. And so out of that, they shared, here's what's going to happen if this bill passes. And it passed, and now that's our reality. And the legislators heard it, sometimes for the first time. We got amazing media coverage to share it in our community. And we realized this isn't a one and done. So what we've done since then is created a series of what we call table talks. We've had 1 so far. And we brought nonprofits back together to say, okay, what are your problems? And how do we solve them? And this was cross-sector. We were debating, do we keep it sector-specific or do we make it cross-sector? It was cross-sector. And what we found was we had 60 nonprofits there. They were excited to be there. They thanked us for doing it. They wanted that safe space to be able to talk and collaborate. But their solutions were very tactical. They were looking at technical solutions for adaptive problems. So our next step is to try and encourage some of that adaptive thinking, and we are in the process right now of putting together table talks around specific issues. We're going to do one around Medicaid. We're going to do one around hunger. We're going to do one around homelessness, affordable housing and poverty, and then see what else comes up, because we also heard loud and clear at that other one, others are really afraid of the downstream effects. Arts and culture organizations are really scared. And so that might be another one. But we're putting these together with our community. And so we are asking our community leaders, we're in the process right now of recruiting what we call table hosts. So the head of our FQHC, we're going to ask him if he'd lead the one on Medicaid, because he's an expert, he's an outspoken proponent, and he knows all the players in that region. The head of our food bank has already agreed to do one on food insecurity. They've asked us to pause it for a couple weeks while we get through the current crisis. And so it'll be an opportunity for people to really talk through solutions with the goal. We're looking at solutions. These aren't bitch sessions, but they're a way to say, okay, let's get your emotion out. Now let's look at what do we need to do so we can take those solutions to policymakers and see what we can do when we work together. Because even the policymakers we talked to said, what do you think of this? They're like, yes, yes, and yes. They want it too. So again, it's one of those things, we're leading from the middle. We're kind of leading from the outside, especially us, because we do have a horse in the race, but not really. And so really trying to bring people together to have those kinds of conversations. And so there's some information about One Table in your packets as well, if you're interested. It's on our website. It's also, we share information via our social media as well. So your next step, maybe, would be, looking at how ready is your organization to change? If you're not ready to change, what can you do to become more ready to change? What stakeholders do you need to engage in the conversations around the problems that are facing your organization? Remember, change happens with people, does not happen to them. So who needs to be at the table? Who do you need to hear from, and who needs to hear what you have to say? That's usually when I'm thinking about who do I put around the table. Those are the two questions I ask myself. And how will you better prepare yourself to lead change, whether you are someone in a position of authority or you're someone more from the middle. So that's my homework for you all, ungraded. But I'd love to hear, when you get back, what you are doing and how you are implementing this in your organization. And there's my contact information if you have questions, you want more information. As I said, there's resources that I put into into the tab. So I think we're out of time. Any quick questions? Otherwise, I'm happy to stick around and answer your questions individually. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks for this one. I appreciate it. Wondering whether you have used any of the change management types of frameworks for helping support people through the change process and all the feelings that can go on in the change process. Are there any of those that you sort of rely upon or use as you're trying to bring people along?
The named tools, using the ABC framework, et cetera, no. It's more looking at Heifetz's model and having communication and giving them. And when you talk about emotion, you bring up an important point that one of the big emotions that comes in change is grief. And so you've got to let people grieve. And it's not that they aren't excited for what's coming, it's that they don't want to let go of the familiar.
If I can just, I think one of the important points of that is regardless of where people are in the hierarchy, whether they're a leader or whether they're a staff, there can be grief and there can be resistance and all sorts of feelings that come up around the change that's going to affect them and their own teams or their colleagues. So I think that grief sort of shows up at all the levels, not only the ones that you might think of from
Yeah.
in terms of those who are directly affected, might be out of a job or shifting roles or something.
And even if you're not losing a job, right? We moved 2 years ago, and I remember, and it was a move I wanted, probably more me than my husband. But I still remember going, oh, I'm gonna miss this, oh, I'm gonna miss that, right? I was grieving it even though I was instrumental in making that change and I really wanted it. So that's a good point. And it's that you don't have to lose something tangible, right? They're losing the familiar, and that's important too. I will stick around if anybody else has any other questions. Thank you very much for your time. There is an evaluation in your packet, so please make sure you complete the evaluation. The GPA staff do look at that and they do share it, and it does impact what we do next year. So thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.